Give me 1 second.
Sounds good. I'll just share my screen.
Oh, hold on for me. I'm gonna introduce you first, and then I will have you share your screen. So
Okay.
Next up, we have Dr. Harrison Stierwalt from, actually, he was doing a postdoc here with us. So he is going to, oh, and I forgot to change your title. My apologies. He's going to speak to us about his experience in transitioning from an academic postdoc to an industry position. Dr. Stierwalt is a senior associate scientist at Novo Nordisk. He completed his PhD at Oregon State University in exercise physiology and skeletal muscle lipid metabolism. And then, as I mentioned, did a postdoc here with us at the University of Kansas Medical Center, where he was awarded an F32 postdoctoral fellowship from NIH. So I will stop and let you.
Okay, thank you. Bear with me just 1 second while I share my screen. I almost never use Zoom now. I almost exclusively use Teams. So it's been a while since I, so just give 2 seconds. This has popped up. Let's see. I'm gonna do this first, and then I'll share my screen. Screen 2. Yes, this is the one I want. Apologies.
No worries.
Okay, is everyone seeing my screen?
We are now seeing it. Yep, take it away.
Perfect. All right, so thank you so much, Becca, for the introduction today. Today, as Becca mentioned, my name is Harrison Stierwalt. I'm a senior associate scientist at Novo Nordisk. I have my personal email up here if anyone wants to reach out to me afterwards, and feel free to share that, Becca, if you would like. But today I'm really going to be talking about how to market your strengths to the job you want. And I'm going to start with a full disclaimer that, you know, nothing that I say today is going to be earth-shattering or groundbreaking. It's likely going to be a lot of things that you've heard from other people, either yesterday or today, or perhaps on the internet. It's a lot of overlap, but what I'm hoping is really pushing the idea that all of us are way more marketable than we think, and we all have a lot more strengths than we realize. And even if you're applying for a position that you may look at and see initially like, oh man, like I'm really not qualified for this job. But if you really sit down and think about it, it's likely that even if you don't have any direct relevant experience, you might have some sort of experience from other things you've done in your career that could be directly applicable. So just going to challenge everyone to think about that, because like I said, you may be more qualified than you think. So today I'm just going to just a general agenda. I'll give a brief introduction, something that I believe is important. Sorry if you hear my dog. Important within your own comfort level. And if you're given the opportunity to infuse some of your personal, things you enjoy doing, or where you're from, those kinds of things throughout your interview presentation, or whatever your verbal conversations, just to potentially identify commonalities with an interviewer. And I guess I'm starting to get into it without really telling you how I'm going to do this presentation. I'm going to give examples of what I've done and what's worked really well for me. And so like you'll see aspects of mine that maybe I've used as an introduction presentation, or things that I've used in my CV, or those kinds of things that I found successful. And so you'll see things pop up, and I'll kind of talk about what I think is important from each piece. So I'll give a brief introduction, and I just kind of talked about why I think that's important, because identifying commonalities can be a way to stand out from somebody else. I'll talk about my scientific path overview, or generally just my career path, because with that, I identified strengths in different jobs that worked for open positions that I applied for and eventually got. But this was definitely a learning process for me, and I'm much better at it now than I was when I first kind of started this. I'll talk about some my actual industry hiring timeline, because it's something that kind of hit me like a freight train. It happened really, really quickly. So it's something that I want to make sure that if you are looking to go into this field, it could happen very fast. So just be, prepared for that potential reality. My personal key successes that I've found, and of course, something that I think is really important is just having exposure and having an idea of what potential opportunities are out there. So I'll talk a little bit about my position, generally speaking, as a scientist and research and early development at Novo. And I would say this is probably one of the smoother transitions you can make in going into industry, because it's very relatable to academia. So like I said, just kind of a brief introduction, and I'll start right here. So obviously we're looking at the US. I'm from Iowa. These are all these little gold dots are places I've lived. And so I've just kind of moved around. I was born in Iowa, moved to Missouri, and then I moved to Florida. I spent a lot of my life there, 14 years. And then because I'm a glutton for punishment, I decided to almost exclusively do cross-country moves after that, going back and forth, which was great because I learned where I want to live, maybe where I don't. But I'm really hoping to not do the cross-country moves for a while, because while they're fun, you get to see the country. It's a lot of work, and maybe packing up my car really efficiently is not a skill that I want to market for myself. So again, just kind of going into a little bit of a brief introduction. I'm a senior associate scientist. I work in the brain and adipose biology department, which is kind of just a title. I work with a lot of different tissues, and I have my education background, and something that I found, because this is something you put on your CV, you'll talk about it, but if it's something on your CV, something that has been told to me by people in industry and in a lot of areas, rather than just listing your degree, it's helpful to have a research focus if you're looking for like a science heavy industry position, and or if you're looking at something that's a little different, you could perhaps talk about some major applicable skills that you garnered or that you would like to market in that specific degree. Like maybe if it's for a writing specific job, you could market the amount of grants or the amount of papers or something like that, but something relevant that is really easy to look at, because that's going to be one of the first things that people look at is your background in that. So I'm just going to let my dog out. He's whining. So yeah, you can go. Sorry. And then having a quick background, this could be something that's used on your CV, it's kind of your elevator pitch, but it's something that you want to have that conveys a lot of information in a very brief, succinct manner. So my background is in exercise physiology, with a major focus on obesity research and using exercise as a therapeutic tool to identify targets of interest. And it's something that I've always kind of used. And I worked in mitochondrial physiology, insulin sensitivity, and skeletal muscle, and liver metabolism, and less so much in the brain and ketone. But it's really great to talk about this in a really quick manner and be able to convey a lot of information. And the idea that I've done in vitro, in vivo, preclinical, and clinical exercise physiology research. So it's great to have just a quick synopsis of who you are and what your professional background is and what your expertise area would be. And then, as I mentioned, I think it's really important to, within your own comfort level, and if you have the ability, to also demonstrate things that you like to do potentially outside of work or outside of your background, because we're not all robots, we are all humans, and we all enjoy doing things outside of work. And this is a great way to potentially identify commonalities with you and your interviewer. And so things that I enjoy doing in my free time is just generally being outside, whether it be hiking, biking, or marrying random people in the woods. This is me and my wife. We got married in July, but generally just being outside. So overall, my career path, and I mentioned it, is I'm going to spend some time here because this is my journey on identifying really how marketable you can be and how you have strengths in areas that may not be directly on what the position you're applying for, but it's a good way to market yourself because there's always going to be something that can be applicable. So I started off at Florida State. There I was mostly in clinical and sport performance. So I was the student director of wellness, and then I was a sport performance coach in athletics. And so this obviously gave me a lot of experience in managing people and doing things like exercise stress tests and those kinds of things. When I was in this, I kind of, after doing a couple positions after this at a couple different institutions, identified that I wanted to work a little bit more in the population where I could be directly impacting human health, maybe not just necessarily human performance. And so I decided I wanted to go into research. And as I mentioned, I had some stops along the way at various different institutions where I was in sport performance. So again, more experience in managing people and just kind of working in the applied sport performance setting. And so I really wanted to look at what's happening at the molecular level, because that was something I was always interested in. Is we would do stuff in sport performance, do an intervention, and people got better or they didn't, but we didn't really necessarily know why, except for the theory of what's in textbooks, but we couldn't directly test it. So I wanted to do molecular physiology. And so I applied for a couple of different graduate programs, but had a little bit of success, and I finally nailed on one where I figured that I wasn't going to be able to do it because I didn't have any wet lab skills or no bench work skills or experience, I guess. But when I landed on this one, what ended up being something that was a strength for me that once I identified it, I really pushed for it. And I think that was one of the things that got me in, is they needed somebody to do their human clinical study. And so with my experience in sport performance and exercise physiology, I was really able to push that hard and then just be honest and say that, I really enjoy learning new things, and learning new bench wet lab skills would be something that's really exciting for me. And this experience was a very, very steep learning curve for me because like I said, I had no wet lab skills. But that's something that I actually market quite a bit for myself later, is I really enjoy the exponential learning process and that steep learning curve. And so that's something that I kind of push for even in my industry position that I got at now. For my postdoc, I worked in more liver and a little bit of brain metabolism. And these icons here are just that I worked in cells, mice, and humans. And this is probably the smoothest transition, where I had a lot of the technical expertise, but it was moving on to a new tissue area. And so that one wasn't quite as hard of a sell. It was just marketing myself, the idea I have the necessary skills, but want to move into a new area. And for both of these, I talking about your, personal interests, those kinds of things. I identified something with my interviewer that really helped garner the conversation and make it a little more casual and make it a little less stressful on myself. With Oregon State, my advisors, they both like mountain biking, so we identified that. KU Med, my advisor had a previous experience in strength conditioning as well, so we had a commonality on that. And so finding anything that really you can have some sort of commonality can put yourself at ease, and also, the people that are working to hire you are looking to hire someone they want to work with, because they may spend potentially a lot of time with you. So it's something that's really, I feel, important to try and identify that if you can. And then going on to Novo Nordisk, I work in skeletal muscle, adipose, and liver. Most of the things I do is in vitro, but I do assist in vivo experiments every once in a while, at least in the designing of those experiments. But this was a very difficult process for me to come up with what I felt like was something that I could market my strengths for, because I'll talk about the hiring timeline. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second, but the job position for this was really, when I read it, I thought to myself, I don't really have any of the experience they're asking for here. But something that is, something you probably heard is half the battle is just showing up. I mean, you put yourself out there, and if you look into a little bit, like I mentioned, you can likely find strengths you have that may be applicable. And so for this, they were asking for techniques that I'd never done before, but with a little bit of research, I identified that, okay, like many things in science, if specifically, if you're going to more of a research heavy industry position, there's commonalities and techniques that you can apply in different ways. So I looked up the techniques that they use, that they're asking for, and identified commonalities between different assays or different research techniques that I'd done that were directly applicable, and marketed myself that way. And then the other thing is I'm just passionate about obesity research. And so that was something that I pushed really hard, and that went over really well with the people I was interviewing with. So my industry hiring timeline, like I said, this came and hit me like a freight train. So I wanted to kind of talk about this, not only to just describe what the hiring process can be like, but also how quickly it can move. So I'm likely got into this process right at the end when they were kind of getting close towards the end of their process. So this moved a little bit faster, I think, than it normally does from talking to other people in the industry. But just the idea, it can move very, very quickly. So in 2021, just as a kind of putting my hands out there, because I was just really trying to keep my mind open. You know, I enjoy academia, I enjoyed research, just generally speaking, but I wanted to keep my options open and not shut anything off. So I had a friend of my PhD advisor who works at Novo Nordisk, and I just reached out to him to see what it's like in industry, like what kind of position he has and what kind of stuff they do at their site in Seattle. And so I just wanted to get an idea. What that conversation ended up being is we chatted for a while. He told me about it. It sounded extremely interesting to me in terms of what they do there. And also we talked about my strengths and my interests, and we identified a potential good fit for an open position that I didn't know about. But maybe he had some, he was excited and maybe open to that. But yeah, it's not something I knew about. And so just keeping your mind open and reading out and trying things, you never know what's going to happen. So a couple days later, he recommended I submit some stuff for it. So him and I put this together in a couple of days. With his help, you know, it's very good to have the insights of somebody who's potentially at that company, whether it's someone you know, or even like they mentioned in the last presentation, reaching out to people and trying to establish a connection through LinkedIn. But having an insight into what is usable, what's not usable, because you know what I've heard is for industry, it's very much a one-page resume, and then you have a cover letter. But at least for this conversation, I found out I could go with a 4-page industry CV and a cover letter. So it gave me a little bit more room to put some more of my experience and techniques and stuff that I could market myself with. So it's good to at least, if you have that ability to be able to know what's usable, what can you submit, and before you go into it. So a couple of days, I submitted the cover letter with his help. Then I had an initial phone interview with a global reviewer. So this was the US talent recruiter who called, and it was very, very just generally speaking, kind of overall telling me it was like the stuff I'd be doing. It's very collaborative, working with different sites across the world. And then I got a questionnaire at the end. And this is where I really had to sit down and think about how I could fill some of the voids that were in this job opening description for the skills that I didn't necessarily directly have, like the techniques that they wanted or what you may have. And so, because it was questions directly related to that. And so I ended up filling them out to the best of my ability and talking about how some other techniques I've done could be applicable, or similarities may overlap. But I even added a question at the end, and I have no clue, you know, who read this or what, but I got a call after, so at least it went well for that situation. But I added something at the end saying I may not have the immediate direct applicable experience for this technique, but this is where I have a lot of overlapping experience. And just talking about my experience as a graduate student, you know, learning different techniques and learning new things very, very quickly, and pushing myself in that and using research as a way to kind of market that strength that I can pick up things quickly. So a couple days later, I had a phone interview with the site-specific talent recruiter. So this is basically just another recruiter calling to set up another follow-up with people that are actually associated with that site. I had a Zoom meeting with the hiring department manager. This was kind of informal, just to see if there was any sort of interest on his end. And so this is just an easygoing conversation, as easygoing as it can be, but still you're always marketing yourself. So talking about my experience, my interests, what I'm passionate about, and something that really stuck with him was, and something he specifically said is he really liked my passion for obesity research, because you can always find someone who has the technical expertise per se, but they may not have the the passion for always looking to benefit the patient potentially. So it's definitely not something to be afraid to show your passion and what you're excited about. Then I had a full day of Zoom meetings. And again, this is within the span of a couple of weeks at this point. That was done. I thought then would be an on-site interview, but their site was still kind of closed down. So I had a Zoom meeting with the senior department manager. And again, all this in the span of a couple of weeks. Was thinking, okay, well, so now maybe there will be an on-site interview. This will continue to go for a while. But then the next week, I received a job offer. This was like right before Thanksgiving that year. So within the span of a month, I had numerous interviews with different people. And then I got a job offer right before Thanksgiving, just a little bit over a year ago. And they gave me Thanksgiving to kind of think about it and go over. And then, I after some minor negotiations, I accepted the job offer. And then the thing that we negotiated a little bit was my start date, because they wanted me to start January 1st. And I asked to push back to March, but then they came at me with meeting in the middle at the end of January. And this was to ensure that I had enough time to wrap things up in the lab that I was in. So this whole timeline, I went from having initial conversation that was just to learn a little bit to me being in a new job a couple months later, and the whole move process that ensued. And so I'm saying this just to say that, you just be prepared for something to happen quickly if you do start to move forward. And I say that because I wish I kind of blindsided the PI that I was working with, who I respect very much, just because it moved so quickly. I thought I'd have an on-site interview, but then I didn't. And so then I had to come with them and tell them that I had the job offer I was planning on taking. So if you are in a situation where you can be open, I encourage you to be open, no matter the interview process, or if you're just looking, because things can move very, very quickly. And so personal successes in marketing myself, I'm just going to glance over this because it's a lot of stuff that's, I've already said, but obviously your hard tangible skills, those have to be on there. That's what's going to get you in the door. You have skills that are directly applicable to the job. If there's aspects of the job that you don't have experience with, do you have other experience you can kind of fill that void that's maybe not directly relatable, but has overlap? If possible, a succinct table of methodologies or relevant skills is a great way to summarize a lot of the stuff that you can do. Be prepared for basic and scientific idea questions, particularly for a position like this. When I was interviewing, they may give me scenarios, and I had to kind of come up with an idea of how I would approach something, or, what are my ideas for a potential drug target? So, you just want to really kind of be prepared and go in knowledgeable about what their position's like and what they may ask you. And that's obviously going to be widely variable with each application. Soft skills, just as important, if not more important. Be prepared for examples of your soft skills. They're looking for someone they want to work with. Don't be afraid to demonstrate how passionate you are, but also be honest. It's okay to not be able to not have experience in everything that you do. But if you demonstrate that you're a critical thinker by coming up with things that overlap, this could be a benefit for you. And then find a way to stand out. It doesn't have to be a hard, tangible skill. It could be something you have in common that makes you stand out, and something that I've found that's worked really, really well for me. At the end of every interview that I do or conversation, I ask them, what do you enjoy doing when you're not at work? Because you can garner a lot about the individual person, and you might identify a commonality that you both enjoy doing something. So working as a scientist at Novo Nordisk in research and early development is a lot of fun. And like I said, it's a very smooth transition from academia. Obviously, it's very different, but there's a lot of commonalities. And so I do in vitro research. So I'm in the lab quite a bit, or I'm researching new potential ideas. I work in Seattle, but the company is based in Denmark. We also have a site in Indianapolis, in Beijing. There's a site in Boston, and this is all the research and early development. Obviously, there's a lot more other sites related to Novo Nordisk, but in regards to research, that's where our main sites are. And so it's highly collaborative across the global organization. So there's, one of the pros of that is you get to work with a lot of great people. One of the cons is I have lots of 6 a.m. meetings, or sometimes I have a meeting like at 7 or 8 p.m. to meet with people in Beijing. So that's, could be seen as a pro or a con. It's relatively fast moving. The idea that we're always looking to identify the killer experiment. So how can we move a target forward, or kill a target, because our biggest resource is time. And I see I'm getting close to my time as well. So, you want to support projects with intellectual and technical expertise, but also I have time to generate my own target ideas. But the idea that it's less academic and always working towards a druggable target. So the major key takeaways is half the battle is showing up. You never know what's going to come out of it, whether that's showing up to talk to somebody, or showing up to a job application or an application. Really just putting yourself out there is half the battle. You're likely more qualified than you think. I mean, it just might not be direct experience. So I really challenge you to sit down and think, like, how do I have experience that could be applicable to this? Be yourself. Try to connect with interviewers, and a little bit of research can go a long way in identifying your strengths. And then the last thing that I think is really important is you're always marketing yourself. So always be kind, don't burn bridges. I mean, it's a lot of the things that was said in the last presentation, that you never know what doors may lead to somewhere. So it's just always, being yourself, and just being excited, and yeah. So, with that, I'll end it. And if I have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. And if nothing comes up, then you have my contact information. I'm happy to talk further in any sort of fashion. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We have just a couple minutes. I don't see any questions in the chat. I will just say I'm surprised to hear that you have the ability to direct some of your research in industry. My understanding was that was one of the major differences between industry and academia. Could you speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah, so it's it's highly dependent, of course, to every situation you're in, and every field is different, or every industry job is different. But I would say the main difference, and the reason I'm able to do that, is it's really early research and early development. So we're starting projects and trying to identify interesting literature and interesting target and see if it's viable. So the idea with the killer experiment, we want to design an experiment that makes it so, is this a viable asset? If not, then we move on. And if it is, we continue pushing with it. And something that I enjoy with this position that I'm in is, I'm constantly moving to new ideas and supporting different ideas. But something that some people may not like is you work with an idea, and if it's successful, you work with it to a point. And then it gets to the point where it's in clinical, and because it's very accelerated, it moves on to a professional project manager. So like, you come up with the idea, push it to a point, and then it gets taken over by someone else and they expand it. So it's very quick moving, and you're constantly moving from one idea to the other. But yeah, it is a rare position where we have a lot of intellectual freedom in this position to pursue new ideas in the time that we have where we're not supporting other projects.
Awesome. Thank you so much. If everyone could please help me in thanking Dr. Stierwalt.